So welcome. Thanks for coming. We have the immense pleasure and joyous occasion today to speak with Feminista Jones, an event brought to you by the College of Arts and Sciences, the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Department, and my home department, the Social, Cultural, and Justice Studies Department. Yay! So we're all here today with Feminista Jones, who is an author, a poet, an activist, and a Twitterista. I'm not sure if that's a real word, may have made that up. But thank you so much for coming, Feminista Jones. We are thrilled to have you today. Please welcome Feminista Jones.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to explain to everyone listening that I got caught up in a blackout, but I'm making this work. As you see, I have the lighting and things like that. So if there are any slight interruptions, I sincerely apologize. There are things that beyond our control, but we're going to rock through this because resilience is what we are all about. So I'm very, very thankful to the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga for having me speak. We are still celebrating Women's History Month. And it's so funny to me because it seems like time has been moving fast and slow at the same time. And I don't know about you all and getting affected by daylight savings time, but it always throws me off. I'm really happy to be able to speak with students and faculty and staff at various universities, particularly during Women's History Month, and specifically on the issue of intersectionality, because I feel like it is such a buzzword and people are kind of throwing it out and not really doing deep dives into what it really means and what it can mean for our futures and how we are using it in practice in real time, right? So we're going to talk about that today. One of the things I like to start off with is this quotation by Dr. Angela Davis, where she says, we have to talk about liberating minds as well as liberating societies. And one of the things that Dr. Davis made clear with this statement is that the key to changing what's wrong with society is changing the minds of the people within it. Right. So one of the things I set out to do with these kinds of talks and these conversations is to try to get people to walk away thinking differently about at least one thing, or maybe they've learned something new. Because I do believe that there are so many different ways we can go about doing this liberation work, this social justice work. And it's not all just about making donations, financial donations, and it's not all just about being outside and carrying placards and things like that. Sometimes it is the people that are documenting what is going on. Sometimes it is the people who are going and are having these kinds of meetings and really engaging people in these conversations. And so I want people to kind of think of this as a conversation. And I know that we're virtual and the pandemic has changed things for us, but I want us to feel like you are in conversation with me and I am in conversation with you. Okay. One of the things that I like to tell people is that, I've been advocating for marginalized people for most of my life, probably because of my lived experiences. It is something that I'm extremely passionate about. It's something that I've devoted years to, and I continue to do so. There's many ways that I have engaged this work. Some of you are familiar. I've done anti-police brutality work. Some of you have read my book. I'm really excited that to learn that many of you have read my book. My last book, Reclaiming Our Space. I've done work in housing and homelessness. I've done work advocating for people living in poverty, people who live with psychiatric disabilities, self-included. But my focus really has heavily been on women and girls. And that's, for a few reasons. One, I fully embrace the woman that I am today. And I know that my experience as a Black woman is a unique one, particularly within the United States and the society and culture in which I grew. I think that obviously I would have had a very different experience had I not grown up as a Black girl into a Black woman. And so the insight and the empathy I have for those that struggle and those who exist at the intersections of these kinds of identities, I feel that helps me do what I do. I was raised by a queer feminist mother. She really instilled in me the importance of owning my womanhood. And I realized over time that not a lot of my peers were given those same lessons. They were raised with a lot of negative talk, a lot of, kind of downplaying talk about who they are as girls and women. Whereas I felt like my mom made sure that I was never ashamed of who I am. My mother taught me, like many Black girls learn, or other girls of color learn, there's two obstacles I have. One, that I am Black, and one, that I am a woman. And then I'm going to face these obstacles simply because I exist in this body and I exist in this identity. And she told me that, no matter what I do, I cannot forget where I come from and that I must always help other women. And that's something that I try to impart when I talk to other people, because sometimes we can get really locked in our silos and we can get really caught in our own focus, our own work. I'm currently getting a PhD, so I get stuck in that sometimes. Or we can feel like, you know what, I'm just going to do this little thing for, my group here in college or whatever. We have to remember that collective action is really what's powerful. And that's one of the things that my mother told me: never leave another woman behind, because we need each other. And when it comes to it, we really are all we have, right? So I am a proud feminist woman, and I've done a lot of studying and work to make sure that I'm not only claiming to be feminist, but that I'm actually living according to feminist principles. One of the things that still shocks me, but then doesn't shock me, is that only 32% of adult women in the United States openly claim to be feminists. But yet, when you ask them, do you believe that women should have the right to vote? Do you believe that abortion should be legal? Do you believe these things? Women will agree. So these are feminist principles. These are things that feminists have worked for, and yet there's still so many women who will not identify as that. And that is because it is a loaded idea, okay? When we talk about feminism now, there are a lot of people who are just like, that's for white women. That is for middle-class white women. That is for able-bodied middle-class white women or upper-class white women. That is for the white women with education. That is for the white women who have all the benefits of whiteness and even some of the benefits that patriarchy affords them. It's not for me. And what I say, and when I say that I am a Black feminist, I am saying that I am a woman. I have the right to claim womanhood. I have the right to fight alongside other women, regardless of race, for our collective liberation, okay? And we're going to talk more about intersectionality, but that is really where a lot of that comes from, is that I do not have to choose between being Black and being a woman and being queer or being disabled or any of the identities that I have that intersect to form who I am. I often speak with college students and with university staff and administrators, and I'm like, I have to remind you all that you all have certain privileges, right? I'm getting my PhD. I have several degrees behind that. I have educational privilege. And even though, I do face the struggle and the oppressions of being Black and being woman, and being queer, I also know that I have privileges, that there are people that I can't leave behind. I have to take what I have and be able to go out into my community. And that's one of the things I encourage all of you. For those of you that are able to get a college education, understand that only like 31% of American adults over 25 have a bachelor's degree, okay? And only 19%, I think, have an advanced degree. So that is a privilege that we can't overstate, all right? What do we do with that privilege? What do you do when you come to a talk like this and you're getting this information? Do you just sit with it? Or do you go back and talk with others about, this is what I learned? When you read a book like Reclaiming Our Space, are you taking that and going to other people and showing them what you've learned, everything that you have, all the knowledge that you have? Or are you saying, I'm just gonna sit with it in my own space and keep it to myself? We can't do that. One of the things I learned definitely as an Afrocologist, and we think about Afrocentricity, for example, is that it is totally about the empowerment and liberation of our people. There is no such thing as knowledge for knowledge's sake. So anything that I'm sharing with you today is not just for the sake of you just learning something different. It is with the expectation that what you learn will take you and guide you towards something else, okay? Hold on. Sorry about that. So when we're talking about things like improving college culture, which is constantly on the minds of women, particularly at universities, where issues of sexual assault, harassment, unfair treatment, inequality within the classroom, within the workspace comes up, we have to talk about what it means to really set out to do something about it. Who's having these conversations? Who's coming together with the provost or with the deans to have these conversations about how we can improve things, particularly for women, and especially for women of color and disabled women and trans women? Are we bringing those women to the table? And so when we talk about intersectionality in practice, it really means looking at these committees that are often formed, these organizations that are often put together that are having these conversations. Who has been invited to participate in this space? Who has been asked to join and lend their voices, lend their experiences to shaping how we move forward as an institution to make sure that the complaints that we have had thus far are not repeated? You understand? So when we're talking about things, we can't just settle on race and gender either. We have to think about ability, disability. We've learned so much in this past year with the pandemic about how we've been able to pivot to virtual things. Well, I live with agoraphobia, and I'm somebody who wished several years ago that more of these organizations and these events were virtual, or that I could do more remote work because I have a severe anxiety disorder that prevents me from leaving my house. Just how you walk out the door, I have to do work to do that. So, we really have to think about, are we really going as far as we can to call everyone in? Or are we taking this for granted? We're taking our privileges for granted. We have to think about queer identities. Are there queer women at the table? Okay. Are we asking people for their pronouns, mine or she and hers? I'm sorry, I don't have that in my thing, but mine or she or hers. Are we asking people for their pronouns? Are we standardizing that? Are we asking people their names? What do you want to be called? Are we affirming people? Are we allowing people self-determination when it comes to these kinds of things, right? When we think about our trans sisters, are we calling them in? Are they making the decisions with us, or are we making decisions for them? One of the things that I know as an activist, I've learned the power of people's stories. There is nothing more powerful than listening to a person's lived experiences and letting them tell their stories. We can't speak for other people. We have to call them in. I think a lot about what it means to navigate these kinds of spaces as a Black woman. The first thing I do is acknowledge that they are inherently sexist and inherently racist. And so when you think about this every day, waking up every day and agreeing to go into these institutions, knowing that they are set up to be against you, it is difficult. And we are intentional about that work that we do. We are intentional, those of you that show up to class every day in your Black woman bodies, in your Native woman bodies, in your Asian woman bodies, in your disabled woman bodies. You are intending to show up every day in the face of things that are discriminatory against you and still try to learn and still try to educate others and still try to get the best opportunities for your life, okay? That's not something to be taken lightly. Class, religion, these things all factor into how you experience life, and therefore should be factored into how universities and employment, and jobs and things like that go about engaging people in those things. The dictionary says that intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantages. That's what the dictionary says. But I'm going to take us back to Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality. And I think I have to keep mentioning Sister Crenshaw because she is too often erased from this conversation of intersectionality. And there have been others that have worked on this concept and have helped develop it, including Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks. We can go back to Anna Julia Cooper 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, working with W.E.B. Du Bois. But Kimberly Crenshaw is really the one who coined this. And in her paper, which is titled Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black Feminist Critique of Anti-Discrimination Doctrine, Feminist Theory, and Anti-Racist Politics, she talks more about what she means when she's talking about intersectionality. I want to repeat the title again in case you were writing it down and you want to go back and read it, or if somebody can maybe put it in the chat for folks. Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black Feminist Critique of Anti-Discrimination Doctrine, Feminist Theory, and Anti-Racist Politics. She says, I will center Black women in this analysis in order to contrast the multidimensionality of Black women's experiences with the single axis analysis that distorts these experiences. What is she saying here? She's saying that I am centering Black women in my analysis. And too often, Black women are erased from the conversations of intersectionality, okay? What she is saying here is that we cannot look at the experiences of Black women, in this case, through a single axis of just Blackness or womanhood, because they distort the experiences that we have. We are both Black and woman, okay? She says that unable to grasp the importance of Black women's intersectional experiences, not only courts, but feminists and civil rights thinkers all well have treated Black women in ways that deny both the unique compoundedness of their situation and the centrality of their experiences to the larger classes of women and Blacks. What is she saying here? She is calling out the feminist movement for erasing Blackness from our identity. She is calling out the civil rights folks for erasing our womanhood from our identity. And she is saying that we cannot understand and fight for liberation for Black women without considering the complexities of our identity. Now, that is where it started. That doesn't mean that it hasn't grown out of that. It absolutely has. Black feminists in particular have always looked at the intersections of race, gender, and class to start. And in recent decades, looking at disability, looking at things like we've had the surge in xenophobia, right? We talk about immigrant issues that are happening right now in our nation. What does it mean to be an immigrant, particularly an immigrant of color, particularly an immigrant woman of color, right? We have to consider how these things affect our identities. Queer identity also became a thing that we began to fold into Black feminism, particularly in the 60s and the 70s. If you have not heard of the Kambahi River Collective, Kambahi River Collective was a group of lesbian women who got together and worked together to come up with a political statement called the Kambahi River Collective Statement, in which they address these specific issues and remind us that sexuality is also a part of this. We cannot separate sexuality from the experiences of racial oppression and gender oppression, okay? Why do I talk about how all of these intersecting identities come together? Okay, if you are social justice minded, you are fighting for all people. I'm one of those people. I believe that no one is free if any of us is not free. There's one person who is not free, then none of us are free. But in order for us to work together, we cannot assume that everybody has the same experiences or the same liberation interests. We have to assume that it takes time to get to know people's experiences and know more about them as full people so that we can connect in the areas in which we have those similarities, but also learn from our differences. And the more we learn from our differences, the stronger our movement is. There's so much I've learned from being on Twitter and on social media, particularly when it comes to trans women and their identity, disabled people and their fight, because although I am disabled, I never engaged in any kind of disability rights work. And so I've learned so much from the disability rights activists about what is needed and what we take for granted, right? We have to be able to connect on these different levels. We have to be able to sit next to each other and confront that issue of racism. I do this all the time when I'm working with white feminist women. I am like, we have to talk about racism. We have to talk about the fact that you benefit from your husband's white masculinity, from your father's white masculinity, that you benefit walking into a space when it's me and when it's you, people are going to look at you more favorably, even though we are both women. So we have to have those tough conversations. When we're talking about being in practice, it's being uncomfortable and knowing that in that discomfort comes progress and comes change. So how willing are we to sit in those spaces that maybe make us shiver a bit, maybe keep us up at night, maybe have us questioning who we are and what we know? Because out of that, we know comes that liberation. Out of that comes the changes in the legislation. Out of that comes the empowerment that we are seeking to move forward collectively as women. A lot of people condemn social media. They say that, oh, it's not real activism. It's just people just talking and things like that. And I'll be honest, yes, there are some people. Okay. If you talk to someone that's been in activism for a long time before social media existed, like me, you know that many of us see this as a tool. I've been an activist for the last 23 years of my life, and I've only been on Twitter for like 11. When social media came about, we realized that there was now this powerful tool that could help us reach more people with. Oh, yes. People, social, let me get it back together. Social media has been a valuable tool. I talk about this a lot in my book. I talk about how especially marginalized people have been able to use social media for spreading awareness about their experiences and things that they're working on. People have started movement. Black Lives Matter was created there. UO Cases, which I started, it's like the global anti-street harassment movement. Me Too, all these kinds of movements started on social media because of, because folks came and were having these conversations. I'm just gonna try to adjust this. I've been an activist outside of this. When you are coming to social media, and especially those of you that are really interested in social justice work and really trying to affect change, you have to come with a spirit of wanting to do better. Being on Twitter or being on Facebook is not going to make you an activist, okay? You have to have that spirit already there. And as women, we are often silenced when we try to speak up about issues that matter the most to us. And social media has been able to level the playing field and has been able to bring us to the center. No longer are we silenced. People can no longer avoid listening to what we have to say. They can't pretend and say, oh, well, we didn't know. We have given you so many examples of the struggles that women are going through. There, you can check the hashtags and you can just look at the movements that have been created around this. One of the things I love is that it's particularly been beneficial to trans women, women of color, and disabled women. These are women who have been repeatedly marginalized and pushed out of these conversations. And now social media has brought them to center. When we're talking about intersectionality, when we're talking about the practices of, really living and showing up in that space, social media has created that space for us. And while if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I don't use it anymore. After 11 years, after doing all of the work that I've done, I have found that it is a rather toxic space for me. And it's one of those spaces that I just don't know what's going to be next. I don't think it's going to last much longer, but I do know that there are other spaces that people get together. And I know Clubhouse is growing now. I'm on Instagram more. I use Patreon. I use Facebook more. It's because I still want to be connected to folks. So we understand as activists that there's going to be good and there's going to be bad in those spaces. There's going to be the good that comes with community building. I talk about this in Reclaiming Our Space. One of the most powerful things we have as women is the ability to create community. If you think about the Me Too movement, if you think about what came about in recent years, it was people saying, I'm not alone. People seeing other testimonies, people seeing, wow, this hasn't just happened to me. I can share my stories. And what I tell people all the time when I come into these spaces is that's how I got started. I started by telling my stories. UO Cases started because I was telling a story about how I intervened in street harassment. And that rolled into a movement. And I bring that up because a lot of times people are thinking, what can I do? How can I be somebody? How can I make a difference in the lives in the world? You think that you have to do something grand. You think you have to do something that warrants red carpet attention. I'm telling you that you do not. It is about the building of the community. Who are the women in your community? Who are the people that are supporting women in your community? Who are the folks that are like, you know what, enough is enough. If there's going to be any change, it is on us. Those are the people that you need to build with. Those are the people you need to connect with. And it's funny because like when people ask me, like, how do you do this work? This is one of the questions I get asked all the time. How do you continue to do this, facing all the obstacles that you do? It must be stressful. It must be this. And I'm like, you know what? It's as simple as saying that I'm a Black woman and I exist in the United States in which Black women have always worked. There's never been a time that Black women have been afforded the opportunity to collectively choose to not work. We cannot choose inaction because we fully understand that if we drop the ball, the world falls around us. And it's a heavy burden to bear. And it's one that I wish we didn't have, but we have to keep it real, right? Like Black women get things done. And so many of the things that we get done are out of necessity, extreme necessity. And the benefits trickle upward. I recently designed a shirt as based off of a chapter in my book. I said, Black women won't save you, so stop asking. Because so much of what people consider intersectionality in praxis is really them going and saying, listen to Black women, follow Black women, trust Black women. And it's like, what does that mean? Because I actually just wanted to go hang out with my kid and watch a movie on a Friday night. And you're saying that people should be listening to me. But what if I don't want to speak? What if I don't want to educate? What if I don't want to save a nation by flipping a state blue? What if I don't want to feel that my votes are going to be the difference between whether or not a country can actually move forward, a country that never wanted me to be here, or whether the country is going to continue to go backwards? What if I don't want to feel like I'm saving people who wouldn't piss on me in a fire? And so when we think about these things, what does it mean when you say that you are honoring women, that you are honoring women of color and their work? Are you really honoring us? Or are you putting us on these pedestals? Or are you putting us on the front lines? Are you putting us up as shields and barriers? Are you putting us as guinea pigs and test subjects? Are you really honoring and supporting us? Right? There is so much work to do. And that's one of the lessons that I get from my mom. It's like, yeah, the work will never end. I mean, we hope for an end, but I don't see it in my lifetime. And that's not to say that I've lost hope or that I don't have faith. It is me saying that I understand the weight of everything. Patriarchy is a hell of a drug. Racism is it's just vile. Heteronormativity, cisnormativity, these oppressive things, these ways of being, they are so hard to shake because people often don't even recognize when they are engaging in oppressive actions. And it's on us, those who are oppressed, to constantly teach and educate people about what is going on. And that's exhausting. And no, I'm not convinced that it will happen in my lifetime or in yours. But I do know that I am walking in the same footsteps of Sojourner Truth, of Anna Julia Cooper, of Wilma Mankiller. Okay, I'm walking in these women that have laid down these foundations. They have blazed these trails. Harriet Tubman, Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins. Those women are still alive, but they have done a lot of the work. It is up to us to continue to push it forward, right? If you think about your favorite feminist and the work that she's done, what are you doing to continue that? You think about your favorite Black liberationists or queer liberationists or your favorite disability activists. What work have they done? And what are you going to do to push it forward? That's how we have to think about our activism and our social justice work. Because again, going back to that idea of community, we are in conversation and community with our ancestors. We are constantly in conversation and community with the people who laid the groundwork and blazed the trails. We are constantly learning from them. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? We are constantly working towards replicating the good and strengthening the good, but moving away from the things that didn't quite work. We are constantly coming up with new ideas. And we are constantly thinking, how can we defeat these oppressive systems? How can we topple it all to the ground? And when you get to be my age, you start feeling like, wow, I don't know if this is going to happen now. I don't know if this is going to happen in the next 10 years. But can I look at my life and say, well, at least I did something to try to push us forward. And that's how I want you all to think. Whether you're in engineering, whether you're a mathematician, whether you're an art historian, whether you are a folklorist, whether you are a biologist, whether you are an Africologist, it doesn't really matter. How are you taking that work that you're doing and using it for the betterment of society? That is when we're talking about how we bring this stuff into practice. We're not just talking. We're not just hashtagging. I refuse to hashtag people's names when they are killed by police or murdered in unjust ways, because people are more than that. We have to honor people that we have lost. We have to honor people that have blazed trails by continuing to work to make things better so that these things don't happen anymore. One of the greatest lessons I've learned, particularly working with women and girls, and especially with Black women and girls, is the power of resilience. You know, I remember when I was in undergrad and I was just like, oh my God, I'm not going to make it out of here. This is too hard. Oh my gosh, I have these all-nighters. I'm up at 3 a.m. and I'm eating buffalo wings and I am drinking, soda that's going to keep me awake and drinking coffee, and I'm not going to make it. Oh my gosh. And I'm going to miss class. I'm not going to make it. But I did make it. I made it so many times. I went back to school several times because I realized that there's resilience there and we are going to make it. We are going to do it. You have to think about what you do when you're faced with those obstacles. When you're sitting in class and a professor says something completely ignorant, something completely bigoted, what do you do? Do you silence yourself? Do you shrink? Do you get quiet? Do you call it out? Do you push back? And I ask this because I've recently had to do this, and I'm going to be 42 in a couple of weeks, and I'm in my PhD studies, and I've actually had to call out a professor and say, no, that is transphobic. That is homophobic, and it is unacceptable. But if I were not, as resilient as I am, I would not have the courage to do that because I would be so afraid of the pushback and what would happen if I said something. So how are you going to challenge your professors today? How are you going to challenge the administration? How are you going to challenge your classmates? How are you challenging yourself? What are some of the ways of thinking, particularly when it comes to women, that you could probably work on? I've struggled lately kind of thinking about this idea of what it means to be a woman, and realizing that so much of what I've thought and identified with as a woman comes from what men have decided women should be. And it really it messes with you when you think about it. What are the attributes of a woman? What makes a woman a woman? And so many of those things are either things that make men men or things that men have designed for us. Why do women have to have longer hair? Why do women wear skirts? Why do women wear ruffles? Why do women paint their nails? Why are women supposed to be soft? Why are women the nurturers? All of these things I call into question. All of these things I learned about what it means to be a woman, I now call into question. Because for me, my most valuable traits are my leadership, my ambition, my outspokenness, my confidence. These are all things that are normally attributed with men. I'm also 6 feet tall, right? So I'm taller than most men. A lot of times people say I'm very masculine. But what does that mean? Part of it is because I'm Black, and Black women are often misgendered and made out to be more masculine. But even then, what does that mean? When I think about putting intersectionality in practice, I mean having these conversations and questioning these notions and these ideas that we have had about what it means to be a woman. What does it mean to be a Black woman? What does it mean to be a woman of color? What does it mean to be a disabled woman, a trans woman, a queer woman? What do these things actually mean in context? And how are we challenging what those descriptors are? If you can walk away from this conversation with any particular takeaway, I hope it's the idea that each of you can make a difference simply by being authentic, simply by being open, simply by affirming your self-worth in words and in practice, and taking the small steps and working collectively to improve the lives of women everywhere. And when I mean everywhere, you all have, Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. You can reach women in other cities, other states, other countries, other colleges and universities. You really have no excuse for that kind of thing. I hope that you leave the space understanding that despite our differences, we have common bonds. And one of them, for those of you who identify, is that we are women, or that we care about women's rights and women's liberation. Full stop. And we can all do something to help each other become better women. I'm open to our questions. I would like us to have a conversation, a Q&A. So I want to see if there's questions. I'm actually like, I don't know if I have access to the Q&A. I do. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A, and I would like us to have a conversation. I think I have to move the space, but I am on my phone, so you all may come with me. We'll see what happens. Again, I apologize for this. Did not anticipate a blackout happening. And so we are just basically adjusting to the fact that these things happen and we're doing the best that we can. So I sincerely apologize.
It's been fantastic. You are amazing. And I just admire you trudging through with, I mean, everything this day has thrown at you. You are rocking it. So thank you.
Thank you so
so
much.
Okay, so I'm going to check the Q&A, see if we have any questions. Well, I have a question. Maybe while you all out there in viewing land are cooking up your questions, I'm going to ask. I really hear that especially Black women are tired of doing everything and fixing everything. And when white feminists have spoken for Black feminists in the past, and I say, I mean, I wasn't around then when they were doing that, really.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
They really screwed it up, like made some serious mistakes. So it's almost like a catch-22. We can't be like, here, we screwed this up, you fix it.
Yeah.
Because you're tired, but we also can't be like, all right, we'll just lead. Here we go.
Right.
You know.
So it's about the conversation, right? So this is what I've been talking about this whole time. It's the building of the community. It is the having the conversations. It is respecting and regarding each other as human beings, that we can come together and sit and have those tough conversations about those differences and say, hey, you know, when you folks were saying these things, it was not working for us. Here's what we prefer. And it's more asking questions. Well, how can we be more supportive? How can we show up for you? What is it that you need? Because if you're feeling tired, you know, how can we help carry this burden, you know, with you? Not for you, but with you, right? Because we're not trying to shirk our responsibilities. As women, we have a responsibility as well. We just want to know that we're not out here fighting it alone and taking on everybody else's burden. And then at the end, we're the last ones to reap any of the benefits of it. You see what I'm saying? So I think that that's really where that conversation happens. And I think what happens often is that, you know, movements start and people are looking for numbers. They always want the numbers, right? So they'll grab anyone that they can to say, we have these numbers. But when it comes to addressing the specific needs of those different people, they're not. They're like, oh, well, what do you mean? We're all, yes, all women, you know? And it's like, actually, it's not. So we need to be more intentional about, you know, what it means when we're saying women, right?
Oh, froze.
Okay, I think there's a Q&A. Sorry. Okay. I would love to know your thoughts on allyship and perhaps specifically regarding white feminists. Got it. Okay. So in 2015, I wrote a whole essay, basically in a thread, about how allies don't exist. And it became a really, really, really popular kind of conversation that I really challenged people to think about what the word ally means and what an allegiance actually is, right? And so when you think about it, and I'm a words person, I'm a writer, so, you know, I think about that. An ally or an allegiance really connotes mutual benefit. And so when I really started thinking about like what Black liberation looks like, or what liberation looks like for Black women, it's like there is no mutual benefit for a white feminist woman, right? Because what we would gain from that is not something that a white woman would experience because it's specific and unique to our experience. So I don't like the use of the word ally. I also think it's performative, and I think that it's a label that people give themselves just because they want to feel included in things. I'm all about people being good people. And that still confuses people to this day. I've been saying this for 6 years now. Be good people. And people are like, well, what does that mean? And I think that's where the problem is. If you were a good person,
then you are honoring and recognizing the humanity of every other individual. And you are treating every other individual as an equal person deserving of the same rights, freedoms, and liberties as anyone else. And yet it is so hard for us to just treat people well. It is so hard for us to just be able to connect with people and just say, hey, you're not all these labels, and therefore I'm not assigning a value to you. You are just a person. And because I just want to be a good person, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to support you. I'm going to, advocate for you. I'm going to be there alongside you. I'm not just going to show up when it's trendy and then extract myself when it gets too difficult. I'm going to be there with you to the end. And that's what being a good person is. And so that's why I don't like really using allies. And I like to just think of, hey, we just all need to be good people. I hope that answered your question.
That was a great answer.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I just really try to get people to think a little bit differently about things because, we have some of the same ideas and they just haven't been working, right? So we need some radical change and some radical thought. And I think about that a lot, particularly in my studies. I was talking with you earlier about just, the work that I'm doing on this paper that I just wrote, in which I'm really trying to get my discipline, which is Africology, to really expand to be more inclusive of queer and trans people. And many people recognize that has been a limitation of our discipline. And so me coming and trying to challenge us, but not just challenge us, but actually coming up with some real solutions. That's kind of what I want everybody listening to this doing. You can point out a problem. You can say racism is bad, sexism is bad, queerphobia is bad. But you also have to start thinking about solutions and start coming up with suggestions and ideas on how we can move things forward. Particularly those of you, again, who have the educational privilege. You have access to colleagues and faculty and staff that can help you work out and flesh out these ideas that you may have for how to bring about change or make things different. But we have to start thinking radically. We have to start thinking outside the box. We have to start thinking that we are moving forward with things. And how do we do it differently than what has been done? Because some of those things have not really done much. We gotta not be afraid to challenge the people who are the authorities, right? We have to not be afraid to challenge the experts, because each one of us is an expert in our own lives and our own lived experiences. So we have the right to challenge when someone else says that they're an expert. I'm like, you don't know my life, and I get a turn to speak. Right.
So when you say you're suggesting solutions for your discipline that's not sufficiently inclusive, could you tell us what some of those solutions are?
Sure. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Africana womanism. It is different than womanism. It is different than African feminism, African womanism, etc. But it basically has 18 tenets that really talk about, how African women or Black women are not prioritizing gender over culture and race, that we care about our brothers, Black men and other folks, and that family is really important to us. And, that we have these African cultural markers that kind of distinguish us from the feminist movement, that we can't operate just from a gender-based lens. And while that sounds like it's good, it's not very inclusive of queer and trans people, because one of the tenets is that, motherhood is essential. And so instead of me saying, well, you are erasing all the women that can't have children or don't want to be mothers or who are lesbians, have no intention of ever, procreating or whatever the situation is, I said, well, what if we expand it to include the idea of the house mother? And you think about trans women and trans people in the underground ballroom scene and how they created family. So if family is important to Africana womanism, then maybe we need to think differently about family. And we think about our queer and trans folks who have created families after being ostracized from their own blood families, and how they create their own families. And you have a house mother who is the mother who takes care of all the responsibility, and she has her children. We can look at that structure as one of mothering and nurturing and say, oh, well, you know what, this can reach our queer and trans sisters as well. Or something like genuine sisterhood is a tenet of Africana womanism. And so I'm saying, well, how do we look at the sisterhood bonds that trans women have formed to stay alive, to look out for each other? Those kinds of things. I started kind of taking the tenets and seeing how they can apply to queer and trans women and be more inclusive and expand on that. So it's daring. I hope it doesn't get me kicked out the program. but I have to do what I have to do because I'm trying to help us grow. And so I submitted it, and my professor said, she said it was brilliant. She loves where it's going. So I feel good about it. Hopefully it'll be thanks. Yeah.
That take on chosen family. It reminds me too of the leather families.
Yes, very much.
Queer
this idea of chosen family is so important. And particularly for Africans and descendants whose families were ripped apart during the transatlantic slave trade, during hundreds of years of slavery. We know better than most what it means to have chosen family, right? And so me bringing a queer lens as a pansexual woman and growing up, you know, with my queer mom and the family that she was in, because our family rejected my mom, and I was going to the, you know, her brother's house, right? And seeing how family is formed. And this was at the height of the AIDS epidemic too. Seeing how these families came together when they lost one of their own, or when someone was hungry or homeless. I'm like, who knows better than us what that is? And so what I'm trying to say is that if Africana womanism could name this, instead of just, because they kind of take a yes, all Black Lives Matter kind of approach, that if we say African, we mean everybody. And I'm like, no, we actually have to name the people that we're talking about, because we can't assume that queer and trans Black people feel included in this if they are not specifically named and invited in, because they're already marginalized in so many ways. So that's what I'm really trying to push for, is that we start naming things and become more intentional about that.
I love that idea. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I have a ton of questions, but I hate to hog this whole thing. I'm wondering if you audience folks out there have questions for our eminent speaker.
Don't be shy. You all can ask questions. It's fine if you don't. A lot of times people are just like, they just want to sit with stuff, or they feel like I've covered stuff that they had questions about or whatever. So, you know, don't worry about it. And again, I'm like, this has never happened before. I'm like, oh my goodness, please don't don't say, oh my gosh, she's a terrible speaker. No.
No, you're fantastic. No, I would not know.
It's tough.
But I do wonder, you've had some people on Twitter and other social media be incredibly cruel to you, say horrible, awful things. And where, you know, sometimes I worry about that about my students. I want them to go forward and, you know, like take on the world, but that, like, there's hateful people out there that say awful things. Do you have any advice for people who want to take on the world, but that's going to attract some incoming fire?
This sounds, as cliche as it sounds, self-care is super, super important. Stepping away, that's why I stepped away, right? And had I maybe taken more breaks throughout the years, I wouldn't feel the need to completely kind of call it quits. So I warn all of you, you young people, take breaks, step away, pour into the people that matter, and let people pour into you. A lot of times we can become givers and we want to do nice things for other people, but we don't really receive it. Let people pour into you, especially at times like this in this pandemic, you know, when people are offering just even conversation and things like that. Buy each other cups of coffee, you know, surprise someone with some flowers, just whatever we can to try to keep the morale high, because this is a long fight, and shifting the responsibilities is super important too. So don't take on everything yourself, give it to other people, work in community, as I have been saying this entire time, and make sure that you step away from it, because it is too much, and our brains were not meant to take on all that stuff. So I've just been giving a cue that I have to kind of move along from this space, and I'm so
you have been fantastic. You are amazing. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. Because we are closing soon, you all listeners out there, this is your very last chance to ask a question or express your appreciation. I have to say, thank you so much, Feminista Jones. You are amazing. You have been a fantastic speaker.
Thank you.
I hope to meet you in person someday.
Yes. What is your, okay, wait, hold on. There was a question. What is your view on Black feminism in the Black church? I honestly can't speak to that. I left the church a long time ago because I felt that it was not compatible with my identities and with my way of living. There are people that are doing Black feminist work in the church. Nyasha, what's her name? Junior at Temple. She's in religious studies there. To feminism church is not my area of expertise. I'm not a Christian, so I cannot speak to that, and I don't want to speak to anybody else.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your fortitude in forging ahead in this
Thank you so much.
day that has thrown everything it can at you, and you just kept going.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. Thank you for coming, and thank everyone for attending. I hope your day gets better from here, Feminista Jones.